On April 15th, Britain moved $1 billion. It did not come from a British taxpayer. It came from Vladimir Putin. We're going to show you how the United Kingdom took $1 billion of frozen Russian money, turned it into 120,000 drones, and shipped them to the exact front line where 33,988 Russian soldiers were killed in a single month, 96% of them by drones. Every one of those weapons was financed by the Kremlin's own capital. And this is where the bill comes due. The number is real. The mechanism is real. The date is real. On April 15, 2026, Ukraine's finance ministry confirmed that London had transferred £752 million, roughly $1 billion into Kyiv's defense account. The source of those funds was not the British Treasury. It was the interest on frozen Russian sovereign assets sitting in Western banks since the invasion of 2022. That same morning in Berlin, Britain's Defense Secretary John Healey announced the largest drone package in British military history. More than 120,000 unmanned aerial vehicles, bound for Ukraine, built in large part on British soil. Then, at 1400 hours Moscow time, Russia's defense ministry did something unusual. It published an address in Suffolk. We will come back to that address because it is the real story of April 15th. What we are watching is a new financial geometry of warfare. Russia's own money is now paying for the weapons killing Russian soldiers. That sentence sounds like propaganda. It is not. It is accounting. In the next 18 minutes, we will walk you through exactly how the machine works, what was announced, who paid, where the weapons are being built, and why the Kremlin's response to April 15th was not nuclear. It was something stranger. Start with what happened on the ground. On April 15, 2026, John Healey flew to Berlin for the 34th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. More than 50 allied nations were in the room. Healey co-chaired the session alongside Germany's Boris Pistorius. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was present. Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov sat at the table. Healey made 3 announcements. They landed within 1 hour of each other. They were meant to land that way. Announcement 1. Britain was transferring £752 million, approximately $1 billion, to Ukraine. This was the final tranche of the G7 Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Mechanism known as ERA. The total UK facility is £2.26 billion. Previous tranches of £1.5 billion were paid in March and April of 2025. Every dollar is financed by interest earned on frozen Russian sovereign assets. Announcement 2. The UK would deliver more than 120,000 combat drones to Ukraine in 2026. This is the largest drone package in British military history. The shipment includes long-range strike drones, ISR platforms, logistics drones, and maritime attack systems. Deliveries started the same week. Announcement 3. Britain's core defense spending is climbing to 2.6% of GDP by 2027. By 2035, the target is 3.5%. Healey called it the biggest amount since the end of the Cold War. But this is only the surface. The question the headlines missed: where is the money actually flowing? Follow the supply chain and 3 names appear: Tekever Windracers and Malloy Aeronautics. Tekever builds the AR-3 and AR-5 reconnaissance drones. Both have been operating over Ukrainian airspace since 2022. The AR-3 fleet in theater has now logged more than 10,000 combat flight hours. Windracers builds the HCMC, a twin-engine cargo drone that in 2023 became the first uncrewed aircraft to land on a Royal Navy carrier. Malloy Aeronautics is a subsidiary of BAE Systems. Its T-150 quadcopter has already been used by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense to destroy a Russian-held bridge in Kherson. So, what does 120,000 drones actually look like? It looks like a supply pipeline running from Southampton to Kyiv. It looks like British engineers iterating on Ukrainian battlefield feedback in 60-day cycles. It looks like one NATO defense industry catching up to where the Ukrainian drone economy has been running for 3 years. The significance is this: Britain is no longer just transferring weapons. Britain is building them under its own flag on its own airfields with its own workforce and sending them east. So why did this actually happen? Why is Britain, a country that in 2010 was cutting its own aircraft carriers to save budget, now running the largest drone delivery in its history? The answer is the ERA mechanism, and it is the most elegant financial weapon the G7 has deployed against Moscow so far. Here is how it works. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Western jurisdictions froze approximately $300 billion in Russian sovereign assets. Most of that capital sits at Euroclear in Belgium. For 2 years, the G7 debated whether to seize it outright. The debate ended the same way every time. Full confiscation would violate centuries of sovereign immunity law. It would spook every central bank on earth. It would send Beijing, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi scrambling to pull their dollar reserves out of New York. So the G7 found a workaround. They do not touch the principal. They harvest the interest. The frozen $300 billion continues to generate returns. Coupon payments, interest accruals, reinvestment yields, those profits are now being swept into a $50 billion ERA loan facility. That facility advances hard currency to Ukraine today. The loan is serviced and repaid over 30 years out of future profits on the frozen principal. The principal never moves, the legal fiction holds, and Ukraine gets the cash now. The United States committed $20 billion to the ERA pool, the largest single tranche. No, the European Union covered 18 billion euros. Britain's share was 2.26 billion pounds. Canada and Japan added the balance. This is the trap Putin walked into in February 2022 and still has not understood. He waged a war of attrition assuming his reserves were untouchable. They are untouchable. But the interest on them is not. And the interest is more than enough to arm Ukraine's drone industry for the rest of this war. Is it unprecedented? Yes. Is it legally tested? Also, yes, the Russian Federation has spent 2 years demanding the ERA mechanism be called a violation of international law. Western governments have spent 2 years answering that the interest is a separate legal object from the principal. No major court has ruled against them. Zoom in on the significance. Every time Britain funds a Ukrainian drone strike, the interest clock on Russia's own frozen reserves ticks up. Every coupon payment Gazprom or the Russian Ministry of Finance would have collected if their assets were not immobilized now flows through Brussels, through London, through Kyiv, and into a warehouse at Mildenhall, and then onto a front line outside Pokrovsk. The machine is self-fueling, and the fuel is Russian. Turn your eyes now to the front line, because the drones paid for by ERA money are doing something the conventional analysts did not forecast. They are eating the Russian army. In March of 2026, the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed 35,351 Russian casualties, the single worst month for Moscow since the invasion began. The previous record had been set in December 2025. Both numbers are video verified. Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov told reporters every strike is documented, every loss is on tape. Of those 35,351 dead and wounded, 33,988 were inflicted by drones. That is 96%. The remaining 1,363 came from artillery, small arms, and every other weapon in the Ukrainian inventory combined. What does 96% actually mean? It means the artillery war that defined 2023 and 2024 is over. It means the Russian army is not being killed by howitzers. It means the Russian army is being killed by a weapon class that did not exist as a casualty producer in any previous conflict in modern history. But there is more. Ukrainian forces ran 11,000 drone sorties per day in March. They hit 151,207 confirmed targets. That is a 50% jump from February. Ukraine's interceptor drones the Octopus and the Sting shot down 33,000 Russian UAVs in March, double the February figure. So why does this matter for the American viewer? Because attrition economics now dictate the rest of this war. Russia is putting 940 contract recruits a day into uniform. It is losing 1,140 a day at the front. That is a negative delta every 24 hours. Do that math across a year. Russia is burning an army faster than it can rebuild one, and the weapon causing it costs less than the boots on the men it kills. The math compounds. A Ukrainian FPV drone costs around $500. A Russian T-90 tank costs approximately $4.5 million. Pavlo Palisa, deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, reported that Russia is now losing 316 casualties for every square kilometer of ground it captures in 2026. In 2025, the same metric was 120 per square kilometer. The attrition curve is not bending toward Moscow, yet the story does not stop at the front line. The ripple hits oil. The ripple hits Europe. The ripple hits Asia. Russia's war budget depends on petroleum revenue. Ukraine's long-range drones. Firepoint and others have been striking Russian refineries more than 1,000 kilometers deep. In March, Ukrainian drone production outpaced Russian drone production for the first time in the war. Roughly 4 million Ukrainian drones are projected this year. And the American taxpayer still in the picture, still contributing. But increasingly, the marginal dollar arming Ukraine is no longer a U.S. taxpayer dollar. It is a frozen Russian dollar routed through Brussels, repackaged in London, and delivered by a Tekever AR-3. That is the new cost structure of this war. We have covered what happened and why. Now let's examine who else is in the room. Start with the G7. The ERA mechanism was designed at the 2024 Apulia Summit under U.S. Treasury leadership. The architecture is American, the legal innovation is G7-wide. Britain is the executor this week, but Germany, Japan, Canada, the European Union, and the United States all signed the same document. On January 6, 2026, the U.S. went further. American envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner attended the Coalition of the Willing Summit in Paris for the first time. Washington's top general in Europe, Alexis Grinkowicz, was there too. The U.S. is not sitting out. Next, the Coalition of the Willing itself. It now has 34 nations plus Ukraine. Britain and France lead it. Starmer and Macron signed a declaration of intent to deploy troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. The stated size of the Anglo-French contingent, 10,000 soldiers. In late February 2026, 600 British paratroopers from 16 Air Assault Brigade rehearsed a rapid deployment into Ukraine during Exercise Orion in Brittany alongside French and Italian units. This is not theoretical anymore. The deployment plans exist. The aircraft are tasked. The rules of engagement are in draft. Then there is Germany. At the same April 15th meeting in Berlin, Boris Pistorius announced a €4 billion German defense package for Ukraine. It includes several hundred Patriot interceptor missiles financed by Berlin, additional Iris-T air defense launchers from Diehl Defense, and joint drone production with Ukrainian firms. This is a Germany the Kremlin did not expect. But what about Russia's countermove? This is where April 15th turned strange. Within hours of Healy's Berlin announcement, Moscow's defense ministry published a list of 12 European industrial sites. The list named addresses, 12 facilities across 8 European countries allegedly involved in producing drones for Ukraine. 3 of them were in the United Kingdom, London, Leicester, and Mildenhall in Suffolk. Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian president and now deputy chairman of the Security Council, amplified the message on his Telegram and X accounts. He wrote that the list must be taken literally. He wrote that these facilities are, quote, a list of potential targets for the Russian armed forces. And he ended the post with a phrase that has since gone global: sleep well, European partners. The Czech Republic summoned the Russian ambassador to Prague the next morning. Britain's Ministry of Defense said the threat would not slow a single delivery. And this is where the bill comes due, because Medvedev's threat is not the same kind of threat the Kremlin has made for the last 3 years. For 3 years, the threat has been nuclear. The threat has been strategic. The threat has been aimed at capitals. This threat was aimed at factory floors, on NATO soil, built with NATO money, under NATO flags. That is not the same escalation ladder. That is a different ladder entirely. But the real story of April 15th is much deeper than a drone package or a billion-dollar transfer. The real story is that address in Suffolk. Mildenhall is a small market town in eastern England. It sits on the edge of RAF. Mildenhall, a Royal Air Force base, operated jointly with the United States Air Force. In February of 2026, a Ukrainian defense company called Ukrspecsystems opened a £200 million factory on the outskirts of Mildenhall. That factory builds the Shark and Mini Shark drones. The Shark is the reconnaissance platform currently guiding Ukrainian artillery and HIMARS strikes inside Russian territory. Ukrspecsystems is the largest drone manufacturer in Ukraine. When the Mildenhall plant reaches full capacity, it will produce up to 1,000 Ukrainian-designed drones every month, inside NATO. That is the address Russia's defense ministry published on April 15th. That is the address Medvedev told the world to sleep well beside. Now run the logic. A Russian strike on Mildenhall hits a town in Suffolk. It hits a factory on a Royal Air Force base. It hits a joint UK-US installation. It hits Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, the Collective Defense Clause, inside 60 seconds of first contact confirmation. So what does Moscow actually do? It cannot launch a conventional strike. That triggers a 32-nation war. It cannot launch a nuclear strike. That triggers the end of the Russian Federation. It cannot do nothing. The factory keeps producing. The drones keep flying. The Russian army keeps losing 1,140 men a day. That is the trap the Kremlin walked into this month. Britain's 120,000 drones are only the headline. The subtext is that the factories are now on NATO soil, paid for by Russian money, protected by Article 5, producing weapons that have already killed more Russian soldiers in a single month than the entire Soviet war in Afghanistan over a decade. Medvedev can post. The Defense Ministry can publish addresses. And the Kremlin can threaten. But Mildenhall keeps producing. Sleep well, Dmitry. Every war eventually forces a question about who pays. This one has an answer most wars never deliver. The weapons killing Russian soldiers on the Donbas front are being purchased with the interest on Russian money built on a NATO airfield and shielded by a treaty the Kremlin has spent 3 years trying not to trigger. That is not a lucky coincidence. That is alliance architecture doing what it was designed to do after 1945. So where does this end? Does the ORI mechanism become the template for every future confrontation with an aggressor state? A model that weaponizes the invader's own reserves to finance the defense of the invaded? Or does the Kremlin find a lever or a sabotage operation, a hybrid strike, a cyber event that tests whether Article 5 means what it says? Drop your read in the comments. If this is the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribe. We track the bill every week. For the war bill, the math continues.